What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We're here with some more PGA DFS picks and lineup advice for DraftKings and FanDuel, this time for the American Express 2025. Welcome. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, and I'm joined by fellow six-figure PGA DFS winner, our PGA DFS analyst at OccupyFantasy.com. It's Niromada. Niro, welcome back for another week.
Thank you, Brian. Ready to continue another, sort of silly season type event here with the multi courses and promo format and stuff. But anyway,
Yes, so
I'm ready.
I'm ready to. And if you're new here, welcome. If you're returning from our first two videos of the PGA season, welcome back. We're going to try to keep this going for the entire season, but we're going to need your engagement to help us do so. What we're going to do in this video, we will review last week's top plays, just really briefly. We don't want to harp on it too much, but we want to see if there's anything that we can learn from last week's event. We will discuss the top plays in our Occupy model. That is our data-driven model at OccupyFantasy.com that ranks every golfer on DraftKings and FanDuel, who the top 6, 7, 8 plays are for this week's event, the American Express. We'll talk about which players will be popular in cash games and which players will be popular in smaller contests and high dollar contests that may exceed the projected ownership that we have or anyone else may have. It's always good to know those guys. And then who are the popular cheap players likely to be this week, and who can we pivot away from, because it's very important. And Nero, I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from last week, especially for some of us who haven't played PGA in a while, or those who haven't played PGA much at all. But last week was a great example of the benefits of fading really any chalk, but especially lower price chalk in PGA DFS when last week's 6 out of 6 cut rate was so low.
Yeah, I think, in DFS, you're always looking for lower owned pieces that outperform, their ownership plus projection, expectation, we'll say. And it always matters. But in PGA, the difference is just really magnified because of the cut and because essentially, if you compare it to another sport, you'd be like saying, okay, well, actually, because I faded these guys, these chalk guys, they just took them out at halftime of the NBA game and they didn't let them play in the second half. And they let my guys, my low owned dudes, they just kept playing. And so I kept accumulating points, and all these other lineups that ate the chalk just sat there as my guys just kept getting points. So, it really matters. You can't fade all the chalk. You're trying to be selective about it, but on the weeks where you can get it right selectively and there's a low 6 percentage from the field, you can really, really profit.
Yeah, so this lineup I have here on screen is one of my four lineups from the par four, the $250 small field GPP on DraftKings. Finished third and 10th. I had another that cashed as well. But faded a decent amount of the chalk, and Nero in this lineup had a 9.5% golfer, a 5.9% golfer, a 10% golfer, but really nothing too crazy beyond that. It's just the inclusion of some lower owned guys. And when the field only made 5% of their lineups get 6 out of 6, any 6 out of 6 lineup was going to have success.
Yeah, 100%. By the way, for anyone that was paying attention to the golf tournament itself, sweating this lineup was an absolute disaster
Yes.
on Sunday afternoon because of Steven Yeager and really Henley and Bradley just being stuck in neutral, but Yeager down the stretch. Oh my God, man, just. Anyways, yeah, it really does go to show that you don't have to get, especially in a contest like that, a four max, higher dollar buy-in, smaller contest. You don't have to go completely bananas. I mean, look at you. You have two guys over 20%, two guys over 10, nobody under 5%, and just two single-digit players, and that's it. But you notice where the single-digit ownership is. Like you're in the 7Ks where we like to fade where you like to fade that chalk, and then you ate chalk with who? Russ, up way up top on the in the price range, and then Ben Griffin, who was up above 8K. So, I think it's a very well constructed lineup. Probably should have got first if Yeager would not have pumped that tee ball out of bounds on 16 like an absolute moron, and I cannot figure out why he hit three wood off the tee on 18. Actually, I heard his explanation at the press conference afterwards, and I did not agree with it. Anyway,
Wait,
yeah,
wait,
just
wait.
very well
What
constructed.
was his explanation?
He said he does not like the way the hole sets up
Okay.
because in his with his new swing speed, he does not like the holes that have that hard dog leg right to left, and so he felt like three wood was a better club for him because then he the first 2 days he hit driver, and the first time he hit a tree and it went like 60 yards, and then the second one was deep in the rough. But he did note, however, that if he would have hit the drive that he hit on 16 off the tee on 18, that pole hook that he hit out of bounds, he would have had like 150 yards left to the green for his second shot. So, okay,
Very cool.
whatever you say,
I mean,
whatever you say, Steven.
yeah, okay, thanks, Steven. And yes, I did not need the reminder, but yes, it was painful, as PGA DFS sweats can be painful from time to time. If we look at our model last week, we talked about all these guys on the show. Number one, Keith Mitchell finished top 30, fine, made the cut. Number two, JJ Spawn, cover boy of the plug, which, just really quickly, Nero, this serves as a reminder for you and me and everyone this week. Whoever the hell I put
Yeah,
on the cover, we got to put him in all of our lineups. Because Harry
yeah,
Hall at the
just lock
Century,
him.
yeah, just put him in all
I'm
your
just
lineups.
locking him. I'm just gonna lock him, and then I'll build around him.
There you go. Number four in our model last week was Ben Griffin, who was in my winning lineup. Chan Kim made the cut. Mac Miser finished top 20. Hideki finished top 16. And again, just to reiterate this point, it wasn't the best week overall, but it did enough to get you 6 out of 6, which is all you can ask for on these weeks like this.
Yeah, any and there was not a ton of ownership again outside of Hideki. Those names you just ran through, there was not a ton of ownership soaked up by those guys. So, low owned guys that make the cut, even if they finish 35th in a week with a very low 6 of 6 percentage, is going to make you money. Period. Now, yes, is it going to make it harder for you to still win a GPP? Yes, it is, but it's really going to raise your floor on weeks like that.
Absolutely. So let's move forward to this week's model for the American Express. And 2 points to note here before I name these guys, the top 7 or 8 in our model, Nero. One is the fact that Xander has withdrawn from this tournament. He was the most expensive golfer at 11,400 on DraftKings. Before I hit the second point, just talk to me really briefly about why that's important once pricing has already been released.
Yeah, well, it's like if they would have done a organically priced an event and decided to make the most expensive guy 10,400, which is something they rarely do, or they might do in a like weak field event where no one really deserves that top dollar. So it's going to make it easier to stars and scrubs, get more guys at the top. I assume that top 5, 6 players are going to soak up more ownership because Xander would have taken a ton of ownership up at the top. So, I think the balanced builds should have even extra leverage because so many people are going to just take JT or take the guys that are up top and put them in their builds.
And secondly, the other point about this week that is especially difficult for data modeling. Now, we're still looking at predictive metrics. We still have a really good feel for our model this week, but there is inherently more variance when the fact that this event is rotated on 3 different courses throughout the first 3 days. Then players after a 3-day cut come back for Sunday and play one of the courses again. Not to mention they have to play a pro-am for the first 3 days. So they're playing with slow-ass amateurs. And I'm sure some golfers do not like that, even though I would say most pro golfers are probably slower than some amateur golfers in this day and age of PGA. However, all the variance with that, Nero, right? I mean, that's why we see guys like Nick Dunlap last year. We see guys like Hudson Swafford win. We see guys like Davis Thompson go toe-to-toe with John Rahm. When we see a lot of big winners because it can be difficult to model this type of event.
Yep. It's also a birdie fest, which adds more variance because the putting, ends up mattering. Because again, with the amateurs, they don't have the difficult pin positions for the first 3 days because if they did, the rounds would take 7 hours. The other thing is once you play 54 holes with a cut instead of 36, like getting 6 of 6 means less this week because everybody is going to have those extra points. You still most likely will need 6 of 6 to win a GPP of any size at all, and certainly the biggest ones. You'll still need all of your guys to make it to the last day. But yeah, just adds a bunch of extra variance into this week.
So we move ahead to this week's model. I have not seen this since we've been doing PGA DFS at Occupy, but number 1 and number 2 in the model this week is the same as number 1 and number 2 last week in Keith Mitchell and JJ Spawn. Nero, are the events that similar, or are the skill sets in some of the courses similar to last week as to what you need? And what are you seeing from Mitchell and Spawn as to why they'd be 1 and 2 again?
Well, yeah, so similar in that usually both are very low scoring. Both require good approach work and good work around the greens and good putting. So if you look at Mitchell, ninth here last year. He was second in strokes gained off the tee last week, and he was also still top 25-ish for strokes gained around the green and strokes gained putting. Um, he's also, like we mentioned last week, first in off the tee on shorter courses, and this basically fits that. You mentioned last week about how Spawn was near the top of the, kind of putting variance, like the return to putting baseline. He was third last week, and last week he was first in strokes gained approach, second in strokes gained tee to green. Doesn't have great course history, but he was 25th here a few years ago.
And next we have number 3, still not the top guys yet, but it's Johnny Vegas, who has been known to go low in lower scoring events, and another guy who looks to fit these courses pretty well.
Yeah, another one who's like top five in off the tee on shorter courses. He was surprised fourth at the Century to open the event, and the stat from there is he was first actually in strokes gained approach and third in strokes gained tee to green for that. Your downs for the Century event to kick off the year. Your downside for Vegas is he's missed his last three cuts in a row at this event.
Not great. Okay. Next we have a guy we haven't seen yet this year, Charlie Hoffman, who to me just seems kind of like Spawn was last week. Solid all around, gets the boost with the putting variance metric. Anything else on Charlie Hoffman? Why he might rate so highly here?
Yeah, it does not have a great course history. Again, I'm more of a course history truther than the model is, so that's unsurprising. I think the thing that I did like about Hoffman, he didn't score that well last week. I think he was like last for the guys who made the cut in strokes gained putting, like literally last. But his strokes gained ranks last week were third off the tee, 11th in approach, and he was fourth in strokes gained tee to green. So, that usually makes for a good high risk type of play. A guy who really struck the ball well the week before, not on anybody's radar because he putted horribly. He's not usually on anybody's radar anyway. So, definitely some positives for him this week.
Next, the model prefers Sungjae to Justin Thomas. And when I was looking into the model this week, Nero, it looks like Sungjae crushes easier scoring courses, perhaps more than JT does. Do you have a preference between the two? And do you think the model has it right with Sungjae over JT?
As you know, I'm not afraid to disagree with the model, but I do have Sung Jae number one in my personal rankings. For those of you who read the plug, know that I also rank the field from top to bottom with my own kind of secret sauce of rankings, and M is number one for me. I mean, he's Sung Jae, so you don't really need a lot of excuses to play him. But if you go down the course history route, he's got six starts here, and only two finishes were outside the top 12.
Damn.
Top 12. And by the way, those two finishes were 18th and 25th. So,
We would, if that's the worst case scenario, we would certainly take
yeah,
that every single time.
yeah.
So, and finally, rounding out the top 8 of the model, Kurt Kitayama, Doug Gim, and Carson Young. What sticks out to you, whether it's what all three of these guys may possess or individually they possess to get them ranking so highly in this week's model?
Yeah, Kitayama, 37, 5th, 9th, 25th in his last four starts. And again, some of those go back to last year. Did like that he was sixth in strokes gained off the tee last week. So I think his long game is in order. Gim is probably the hardest one for me to like. I know he scores well on easy scoring courses, but he missed his last couple cuts here. He didn't hit it very well last week, so I'm less high on Gim. Means that he'll probably play pretty well. And then the last one for Carson Young, he was 17th here last year. And again, another guy who does better in the easier scoring conditions. And I think he is higher up on that kind of putting variance, like regressing to the positive mean there. One of those players.
And the guys who got that tag last week, Keith Mitchell, J.J. Spawn, both gained strokes putting last week with that positive putting variance tag in our model. But I was just looking through Nero of the guys last week, just looking to see how they did. Nick Taylor was on that list. He just ranked so poorly in some of our other metrics. But it goes to show that,
Oh, was he really?
yeah, if I'd have looked into that before, it might have played a little more Nick Taylor. But it goes to show that when these guys who meet their baseline in other areas but start putting as they should be putting, then we get results better than what the ownership and projections are giving us. So, I want to ask you this too. Do you think that the wind last week was a big factor in 6 out of 6 being so low in the fact that maybe projections or people who do shot by shot or stat level projections for PGA DFS in the sense that maybe different characteristics became more important in the win last week than maybe if it was an easier course?
I mean, certainly you would think so. Now, some of your better ball strikers like Corey Connors, Ben On, like missed the cut, um, but the scoring was down overall. Like the winning score there last this year was much lower than it is historically, and the course was very firm. I don't know if any of you watched any of it, but the greens, the fairways were running out completely. Like there was really an emphasis on being able to control your ball and then have a good, solid short game last week, which I think is maybe a little bit different than it has been there historically.
All right, next, let's move on. Let's talk about guys who will be higher owned in cash games, higher owned in smaller field GPPs. Again, if you don't have access to any models or projections, these are guys that you probably should consider pretty heavily, especially if you're playing lower dollar contests. But these are also guys, if you're playing higher dollar contests or any contest where pros can enter, their ownership in your contest will likely be higher than what their projected ownership is because of there are some industry projections out there that tend to bump these guys up a little bit. Near who the guys we're looking at this week that are going to fit this bill and be higher owned than projected.
Yeah, I think on DraftKings, you start with Sung Jae. And again, you actually can have Sung Jae on both DraftKings and FanDuel, and that's partially, by the way, due to the withdrawal from Xander at the top. Again, soaks up more of that ownership, especially from the sharper crew who's looking to anchor a lot of their lineups with something very reliable. So the rounding out the list on DK, I'd have Kitayama, Ben Griffin, Sepp Straka, and last week's darling, who missed the cut by one, Andrew Novak. Uh, Also, Straka was a tough one. I was very invested in him having a big weekend, and he was right there, and then just totally fell apart on the weekend. FanDuel, the list is very similar. I think you'd have Kitayama, Sungjae, and Novak from that same list. Add JT to that. Again, FanDuel almost all just due to their pricing, it's almost always easier to kind of make an all-star lineup, have more of those guys at the top, and not have to go as dumpster diving as you have to go on DK. And then Davis Thompson and Mac Meisner. You are also getting, Brian, as you note, often we pay a lot of attention to the betting markets, and you're getting, especially for Straka, you're getting a lot of early support in the markets, and the same a little bit for Davis Thompson as well.
Interesting. And, we noticed a couple of these same guys on the list last week, this same list. Does that give you more belief that the skill set needed this week is going to be similar to last week, kind of what the model was picking up on with Keith Mitchell and JJ Spawn? Or do you think these guys just aren't priced appropriately yet? Any thoughts as to why we might see some overlap guys like Straka, Novak, Ben Griffin?
It's probably both. I think you've got similar skill sets that are in demand. And again, it's not guys like you and me driving the betting market. In somebody's sophisticated rankings, settings, whatever, they must have Novak or Straka and Davis Thompson, Keith Mitchell, Spawn. Like some of those guys they must have them rated higher than the market is currently valuing them. That will probably even itself out throughout as the season unfolds. You kind of see the same thing in football, where a group or a syndicate or something like that might have a certain set of teams rated higher than the market does. In the first 3 weeks, you're like, why does everyone keep betting Penn State? Well,
Right.
it's just because there's a group or two that has Penn State rated much higher in their rankings than the market does.
There's actually a really funny and good golf example with this. It was a couple of years ago where, so every week in our daily plug, Nero, not only does he give his top plays, his course attributes, weather, lineup construction tips, everything you need for this event, which by the way, will be posted Wednesday morning. So make sure you check that out. The link is in the description below. But he also comes in at some point Wednesday or Thursday, depending on the time of the event, and giving a betting market update, maybe some ownership updates as well. And there was one year, I think it was 2 years ago, where every single week Ricky Fowler got hit. And we were like, okay, clearly someone has Ricky Fowler rated much higher or knows something about Ricky Fowler that we do not know. And then Nero, it came out that he got what, corrective lenses or corrective laser surgery or
Yep.
something. It's like, oh, well, there we go.
Yeah, he corrected his vision, and he had always been apparently not been able to see super well, and his depth perception wasn't great. And then he had the corrective vision surgery, and like he we waited, didn't really happen, but then towards the end he did start playing better because we were just waiting for him to actually show like why someone keeps betting him. But yeah, often you'll find something out later, and you'll be like, oh, okay, now I understand why. You and I also will see it with like, oh, this guy was reunited with his coach. Oh,
Yeah.
when did he get reunited with his coach? Like 2 months ago. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Like he caught steam like 6 of the last 8 weeks in the betting markets. Just again, like any other market, access to information is paramount, and folks who can access that information will, try and profit from that information.
And that's a big reason why we focus on betting market stuff, especially in PGA, because we may not have access to that information. In fact, I tell you, we do not have access to that
Which,
information.
yeah, 100%. I just want to make it 100% clear. I have 0.0 access to that kind of information.
But people who do make bets and move the betting markets, and if we track the moves appropriately, and we've been studying how the markets move in golf for many, many years now, and we have a good idea of what moves mean. And that way, indirectly, we can figure out when these guys have changes in their lives or their swings or their situations, we can benefit from that just by monitoring the betting market. So make sure you check out our daily plug and our Discord when we post those betting market updates every single week. All right, one more segment to talk about here, Nero, pivots from popular cheap players. Now, I will advise a word of caution here because it's only Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon when we're recording this, and we named some guys last week that ended up not being popular whatsoever. So this can certainly
Yep.
change. But just as of Tuesday, who are some guys that look to be popular in the lower price range that if they miss and we take guys around them, we could benefit from?
Yeah, in the upper sevens looks right now like two of the more popular people would be Ben Griffin, Tom Hoagie. Certainly, you could play either one of them if you were interested. I don't have a huge negative case, against either one. A pivot for me would be Nicholas Echeverria, who's just a little bit more expensive. He was the loser in the playoff to Nick Taylor. Definitely some question mark. How's that? How will that affect him? Unsure, but he's a guy that no one is not. He's not really on many people's radar. And over the last 6 months, he's just played some outstanding golf. And maybe this might just be who he is as a golfer. So he's a good pivot from those two for sure for me. And then I think a little further down we've got Johnny Vegas and Step Straka, who might be more popular. Certainly Straka I think is going to be popular no matter what. Vegas maybe is a little bit more questionable, but he could end up being popular if he stays unpopular. Obviously, we mentioned him above. I think he's fine. He's fine to stay with. Even if he gets a little popular, he's probably fine to stay with. But if you're into looking for a pivot off of him, the two at 7,500 would be very good. Daniel Berger, and Kevin Yu would both be good lower owned pivots. And I would be actually unafraid to go right back to last week's darling, Andrew Novak. Again, if we assume everything being similar, he only missed the cut by one. He just didn't play, just didn't putt great or have a good short game in the second round, and that was really it. I'd say Ricky Fowler, but I watched him play in the inaugural TGL event last week, and he looked terrible. So
Well, there you
maybe
go.
maybe not Ricky. So
All right. Well, if you're interested in playing Ricky Fowler, maybe there's a negative case against it. And you said really quickly, you said like I don't have a huge negative case against Tom Hoagie or Ben Griffin. And our argument for those of you out there is sometimes the negative case is it is golf and weird stuff happens. Look at Corey Connors last week. Looked great in every metric, and then he loses 4 strokes on the greens. That's something we can't predict. And if you've ever played golf yourself, you know that from one shot to the next, let alone one day to the next, anything can happen.
I think the thing that people need to understand is, high ownership in golf is the most fragile high ownership thing in DFS. Now, you can have a backup point guard who's priced like a backup and he's playing the starters minutes. You can have the backup running back, or you can have the wide receiver who's, gotten 8 or more targets in his last 3 weeks and the pricing just hasn't caught up. Like all of those things are much more dependable than a golfer who is getting 30%, 25, whatever 2x, 3x ownership they should be getting. Like that just is the sport itself is just so much more fragile and so much more it's so so less dependable in the fantasy scoring than the other sports that it makes, any reason, as you and I often say, that you can find to fade someone at higher ownership, you should take it. If you have something that's worth it, take it and fade it and let golf be golf.
Absolutely. That's a perfect way to put it and a perfect way to end this episode. We'll be back again next week. Nero's will not be here, but I will be here to give you guys some of the same golf tips next week for next week's event. The Daily Plug will be up later tonight or early tomorrow morning. Occupy model is updated with ownership for DraftKings and FanDuel. That will update assuming any withdrawals throughout the next day and a half. And then our Occupy Fantasy Lineup Builder, which allows you to build up to 300 lineups. Used the builder to build all the lineups you saw on screen earlier with my wins, putting all the rules in that Nero talks about in the Daily Plug. Combine those two together. It's how you build profitable golf lineups. And again, Nero, just to be clear, it's really hard to win every week in golf, but we're looking for those couple of weeks every single season where we get 6 out of 6 and the field doesn't, and we have a couple spike weeks, and that's really what pays off in golf. It's not like some of these other sports where you can consistently win every single week unless you're playing really, really, really small contests, which again we do recommend people do.
Yeah, I mean, my roto tracker would tell you that there are some years that are where it's difficult to win in golf consistently, let alone week to week. Again, especially if you're playing larger contests, high stakes or high risk type of stuff. Just very very hard. You're really looking. It's the epitome of 2 to 3 weeks to pay off the whole year. Like golf DFS is the epitome of that approach.
Absolutely. So again, we're trying to do this video every single week of the season, but if we don't get 1,000+ views, we don't get the engagement, it's not worth our efforts to put this in. So if you want to see this video every single week, here's what you can do. You subscribe to the channel. That gets you notified, but it also lets YouTube know that people like this type of content. Giving it a thumbs up is another free way. And dropping a comment surprisingly helps more than you think. So a comment about this slate, questions, whatever you do. If you comment, give a thumbs up and subscribe. That's the best chance for us to surpass 1,000 views on our golf videos, which means we will continue to do this throughout the rest of the season. So for Niromada, I'm Brian. Thank you everyone for listening, and good luck at the American Express.